Get that child off the mop bucket right now! The voice sliced through the night like a whip, sharp enough to make the guard's flashlight jerk and the laughter vanish. Clara Morales froze, her hand still steady on the bucket handle, while Evelyn Carter's small giggle died into silence. The billionaire's car idled at the curb. Tinted window rolled down just enough for his command to spill into the corridor of light. Clara's eyes didn't waver, though her stomach turned. She spoke quietly, calmly, with a strength only she could hear. She's safe. Safer here than anywhere else you can buy. The guard blinked at her, confused. But Victor Carter leaned further forward. His glare carried the weight of someone used to obedience. For a moment, the space between them pulsed with unspoken defiance. Clara didn't move, not even when Evelyn slid sheepishly off the bucket. The silence was heavier than any words. And if you're listening right now, don't scroll, because this is how humiliation looks in public, and how reversal begins in private. If you want to see where this clash goes, subscribe right now so you don't miss the turn when power collapses in front of witnesses. Clara pushed the mop bucket aside, not hurried, not cowed. She adjusted her grip and finally turned toward the man whose fortune could purchase buildings but never laughter. Calm but unshakable, she walked the line between duty and dignity. To anyone else, she was only a janitor. To herself, she was the woman who had once steadied children gasping for air, who had charted monitors with trembling parents at her side, who had carried lives in her hands long before bleach and uniforms. That truth sat quiet in her chest, waiting. Evelyn glanced up at her father's car, the brief sparkle of play still lingering in her eyes. Clara caught that spark and tucked it away. It reminded her of her own daughter, Lila, asleep at home, breathing softly under a second-hand blanket that smelled of lavender detergent. Every night, Clara scrubbed these floors. It was for that child, to keep custody safe, to keep the world's cruelty outside their door. She thought of the night court hearing, the one where her husband's debts had almost stripped Lila away. She remembered the lawyer's cold voice, the judge's glance at her uniform, the unspoken verdict that worth was measured in salary, not love. Those scars lived quietly beneath her sleeves. Tonight's humiliation was nothing new. It was only louder. The billionaire's car engine hummed, a sound that spoke of imported precision and control. But Clara knew control came not from engines or money, but from holding your ground when someone tried to shrink you. She leaned on the mop handle as though it were a staff, her breath even, her heart steady. For a moment, she felt the floor shift beneath her feet, not physically, but symbolically. The janitor's bucket, the billionaire's car, the child caught between worlds, was all theater, and she refused to play the role he assigned her. She would not be the silent worker who bowed and apologized. She would be the quiet wall he couldn't push past. "You chose the wrong person to shout at tonight," Clara whispered, barely audible, but her own words fed her spine with iron. She turned back to her work, mop sliding across polished tile with calm precision, like nothing had happened. But inside her chest, she knew the clash wasn't over. "Where are you watching from?" Because when a man like Victor Carter thinks he's finished with someone like Clara Morales, he's only written the first page of his own undoing. The sound of the mop against tile was steady, but Clara Morales could still feel the sting of headlights fading from her skin. Victor Carter's car disappeared through the executive exit, leaving behind silence that didn't feel like peace. It felt like judgment. The guard shifted on his feet, muttering something about professionalism, then walked off. Alone again, Clara's breath came slower, heavier. She bent to wring the mop, her hand steady even if her chest wasn't. She had promised herself not to let men like Carter shake her. They always tried. Judges in black robes, administrators in cold offices, debt collectors who measured her life in digits and deadlines. They all tried to make her smaller. Tonight had been just another performance of the same play. Yet Evelyn's laughter, those 3 seconds of freedom on a mop bucket, reminded Clara why she refused to shrink. Joy mattered, children mattered, and no man's fortune could buy the kind of care she had carried in her hands before the world pushed her into uniforms and bleach. Still, the moment gnawed at her. She wiped sweat from her temple and glanced at the security camera, blinking red in the corner. How much of that scene had been recorded? Would Sloan Whitaker, the building's operations director, call her into the office tomorrow? Sloan loved order, loved hierarchy. Clara had already learned the woman's disdain for janitors, who dared to be more than background. If Victor Carter mentioned tonight, Sloan would weaponize it. Clara couldn't afford another mark against her record. Custody hearings looked for marks like that. The corridor smelled faintly of citrus cleaner. But Clara's mind drifted back to the sterile smell of hospital corridors. She remembered blue gloves snapping tight, the buzz of monitors, the steady mantra of numbers that once guided her every move. She had been Clara Morales, RN, pediatric intensive care. She had known how to handle codes, how to calm terrified parents, how to turn chaos into survival. That woman was buried, hidden under bills, grief, and the title of janitor. But she hadn't disappeared. She lived in Clara's bones, waiting for the moment when survival demanded more than a mop. Clara pushed her cart down the hall, footsteps echoing in the hollow quiet. Her thoughts turned towards Lila. Tomorrow morning, her daughter would ask again why they couldn't have pancakes like other kids, why their kitchen light flickered, why mommy smelled of chemicals every night. Clara's answers always bent toward hope. We're saving. We'll fix it. One day soon. She hated lying, but hope was all she could afford to hand over. Lila didn't know that every dollar was calculated between food, rent, and the lawyer who kept their custody safe. And Clara intended to keep it that way. By the time she reached the lobby, the building's marble floor gleamed. The grand chandelier above reflected in streakless shine. A display of wealth meant for clients and executives. Clara's reflection stretched faintly in the polish, her janitor's uniform plain against the grandeur. She paused, staring at the faint shadow of herself. Not a nurse, not a mother in court, just a worker cleaning footprints from men who would never see her. The sting of Victor Carter's glare pulsed again, but she inhaled slowly, straightened her back, and resumed her work. That was when she noticed movement by the glass doors. A small figure pressed against the pane. Evelyn, the billionaire's daughter, lingering while her father spoke to the driver. Her eyes found Clara instantly, wide and curious. She lifted her hand in a small wave, a flicker of gratitude or maybe longing. Clara's throat tightened. She offered the smallest smile, one she reserved for children who needed reassurance. Evelyn's shoulders relaxed. In that instant, Clara understood something. The girl wasn't spoiled. She was lonely. Lonely enough to find joy in a mop bucket ride. Lonely enough to find comfort in a janitor's smile. The moment broke when Victor returned, his commanding stride pulling Evelyn toward the car. His voice carried sharp, clipped words about bedtime, about schedules. He didn't look back at Clara, but Evelyn did. Just for a heartbeat, the girl's gaze clung to her as if memorizing the shape of kindness. Then she vanished into the car, and the door shut with a sound that felt final. The engine roared, and they were gone. Clara exhaled, forcing herself to turn back to her cart. She needed to finish the lobby before midnight. She needed this job intact. Tomorrow, Sloane would likely bring up tonight. Clara would have to stand still under that cold gaze, pretend her insides weren't boiling, pretend she hadn't been humiliated. But tonight wasn't over. The story wasn't finished, because sometimes dignity isn't restored in boardrooms or through apologies. Sometimes it comes in crisis. And Clara Morales had been trained all her life to answer crisis when others couldn't. Her mop swished across the marble again, rhythmic and steady, a quiet defiance against the night's sting. Deep down she knew. Victor Carter believed the confrontation had ended at the curb, but he hadn't seen anything yet. The mop handle clicked into place against the cart drawer. Clara Morales paused to stretch her back. The marble floors gleamed beneath the chandelier, but the shine didn't ease the weight pressing down on her chest. Victor Carter's glare still lingered, sharp as glass shards buried in memory. She told herself to shake it off, to focus on the rhythm of her work. Yet beneath the motions, the truth pulsed steady. Humiliation was only the opening act. Something heavier was coming. The night shift was always quieter after midnight. Elevators hummed occasionally, carrying late executives or exhausted assistants who barely glanced her way. Clara moved silently, the scent of disinfectant trailing her path, every step purposeful. Her thoughts, however, wandered to Lila. Tomorrow, the school counselor would send another note about missed payments for extracurriculars. Clara had already decided which bill she would delay to keep her daughter's spot. Sacrifices stacked like chairs against a wall. Always one more. Always hers. As she wheeled her cart past the executive lounge, voices drifted through the closed door. She recognized one immediately. Sloane Whitaker. Smooth, clipped, rehearsed. "Mr. Carter, we'll handle it. Staff are replaceable." Clara stiffened. Replaceable. The word drilled into her spine. She gripped the cart tighter and moved on. But every syllable burned. Her path curved toward the east wing, where glass walls framed the city skyline. The towers glittered in the distance, monuments to fortunes that never touched families like hers. Clara's reflection looked back at her, shoulders squared, uniform neat, despite hours of scrubbing. For a moment, she imagined peeling it away, standing in the scrubs she once wore. Badge clipped to her chest. Nurses at her side trusting her to lead. The echo of who she used to be haunted her with both pride and grief. The corridor lights flickered briefly, pulling her from memory. She checked the breaker closet out of habit, adjusting the loose panel that often sparked. Her fingers moved with practiced efficiency, twisting the switch back into place. The light steadied. She let out a slow breath. Even now, even unseen, her instincts kept order. Behavioral foreshadowing, she thought wryly, though no one here would notice competence hiding behind a mop cart. The elevator dinged at the far end, and Clara's pulse quickened as the doors opened. Victor Carter stepped out. Phone pressed to his ear. Evelyn's small hand caught in his other. Clara ducked slightly, though she knew she couldn't vanish. His stride was quick, controlled. Evelyn half-dragged to keep pace. The girl's eyes met Clara's again, flickers of recognition softening her exhaustion. Clara gave the smallest nod, reassurance tucked into the gesture. Victor's voice carried, irritated. "I don't care if the doctor's delayed. My daughter will not wait. Do you understand me? Send another car." He didn't look at Clara, didn't even register her existence. Yet Evelyn's gaze clung to her as they passed, like a tether she wasn't ready to release. Clara swallowed hard, turning back to her cart as they disappeared down the hall. She didn't need the details to sense what was wrong. Children's fatigue, the subtle droop in posture, the pallor Evelyn carried, all things Clara's trained eyes caught in seconds. Something was unraveling beneath the surface. something no billionaire tantrum could fix. The memory of ICU nights surged back. Children pale, parents desperate, alarms screaming. Clara had been the calm in chaos, the one who acted when others froze. She wasn't supposed to feel it anymore, those instincts, but they clawed to the surface. Watching Evelyn stumble at her father's side, Clara knew crisis wasn't far. And when it came, money wouldn't matter. Only skill, only steadiness. She forced herself to keep moving, to scrub another streak from the glass. But her ears tracked the echo of Carter's voice as he argued down the hallway. The building's pristine order couldn't hide the fracture lines beginning to spread. She had seen it too many times, behind curtains, under fluorescent lights, in families who thought wealth insulated them. Crisis didn't care. It arrived uninvited, unbought, unstoppable. Clara's mop slid across the final tile of the east wing. She leaned on the handle, staring out at the city again. Lila's future hovered in her thoughts, tethered to every choice Clara made tonight. If she lost this job, custody would be at risk. But if she ignored what her instincts screamed about Evelyn, the guilt would cut deeper than any paycheck. She closed her eyes briefly, steadying her breath. She would not move prematurely, not reveal herself too soon. Timing mattered. In hospitals, in life, in battles like these. You waited for the exact moment, and then you struck. The clock in the lobby chimed once. The sound echoed through the marble halls, long and low. Clara resumed her work, but each stroke of the mop carried the weight of inevitability. A storm was gathering inside this tower, and she was the only one trained to meet it. Because while Victor Carter believed the night ended with his scolding at the curb, Clara knew better. Crisis had already taken its first steps, and when it arrived, she would be standing exactly where no one expected a janitor to stand. The echo of the clock's chime still lingered when Clara Morales pushed her cart toward the service elevator. Her steps were measured, but her chest tightened with every footfall. She could almost hear the faint trace of Evelyn Carter's uneven breathing in the hall beyond, the fragile rhythm only a trained ear would catch. She pressed her palm briefly against the cart handle, grounding herself. Timing mattered. She would not break cover until the moment demanded it. The lobby gleamed in silence, its marble floor reflecting the chandelier like 100 fractured stars. Clara worked the mop in careful arcs, restoring polish to what was already spotless. This was how she survived, by making the invisible visible, by ensuring no one had a reason to look at her twice. Yet her mind remained on the billionaire father's voice, sharp and insistent. She had heard desperation hidden behind arrogance before, though men like Victor Carter would rather burn the earth than admit it. Footsteps drew her attention. The security guard from earlier strolled back into the lobby, his radio crackling faintly at his hip. He glanced at her, then at the pristine floor, and smirked. You really think letting some kid play with your mop was smart? Carter's not the forgiving type. His tone dripped with disdain, the kind that assumed her silence meant submission. Clara straightened slowly, her gaze steady. Children don't need forgiveness for laughter, she said. Her voice was calm, almost quiet, but unflinching. The guard shifted, clearly unused to janitors answering back, and muttered under his breath before disappearing into the side corridor. Clara returned to her mop, but inside she carried the weight of every word. She had chosen dignity, even if it cost her tomorrow. The elevators chimed again. This time, Sloane Whitaker stepped out, heels clicking against marble with deliberate authority. Clipboard in hand, dark suit pressed to perfection. She was a contrast of precision and control. Her eyes swept the lobby, locking on Clara with surgical sharpness. "I've had a report," Sloane began, voice clipped. "Mr. Carter didn't appreciate you entertaining his daughter." She lingered on the word like it was a crime. Clara kept her expression even, though her stomach tightened. "She laughed," Clara replied, "for 3 seconds. Sloane's lips thinned. "You're here to clean, not to socialize. This building depends on discipline, and I won't tolerate distractions. One more misstep, Morales, and we'll have to reconsider your employment." The words carried the weight of judgment, final and cold. Clara nodded once, not in agreement but acknowledgement. She would not give Sloane the satisfaction of visible fear. Inside, though, panic churned. Losing this job would ripple into every corner of her life. Rent unpaid, legal fees abandoned, Lila vulnerable. She clenched the mop handle tighter, her mind flashing back to steadying EV lines, to adjusting ventilators under pressure. She had carried heavier weights than Sloane's clipboard, and she would again. Sloane turned briskly and left, her heels echoing like a gavel strike. Clara exhaled slowly, steadying herself with the rhythm of breath. She resumed her work, each motion deliberate, each stroke across the marble a reminder that she would not collapse. She had stood against worse storms. This was only preparation. As the night stretched deeper, exhaustion pressed against Clara's shoulders. But her senses stayed sharp. Every flicker of light, every sound of footsteps, every echo mattered. She moved through the building like a shadow, unseen yet entirely aware. The silence gave her space to think, to plan. If crisis came, as her instincts warned, it would not arrive politely, and she needed to be ready when it broke. Around 3 a.m, the building grew still. Clara leaned briefly against her cart, closing her eyes. But rest was short-lived. From somewhere above, a muffled commotion echoed. Raised voices, hurried steps, the unmistakable tension of panic. Clara's body reacted before her mind caught up. She straightened, heart hammering, every nerve awake. She knew that sound. It was the sound of crisis, cracking through wealth's illusion of control. She pushed her cart to the side and pressed the elevator button. The doors slid open, and she stepped in, her reflection staring back from the polished steel. Not just a janitor, not anymore. The numbers ticked upward, floor by floor, the hum of machinery a drumbeat in her ears. When the doors parted, the air itself felt charged, sharp, frantic. Down the corridor, she saw Victor Carter surrounded by aides, his voice raised, commanding, but edged with panic. And beside him, Evelyn, pale, slumped against the wall, her breaths shallow, uneven. Clara's heart clenched. She didn't need tests or monitors to know. This was the moment. The crisis had arrived, and no fortune could buy the solution fast enough. Clara stepped forward, steady and silent. Her mop shoes squeaked faintly against the floor, announcing her presence to those who would never have noticed her otherwise. Heads turned, eyes flicked with surprise, disdain, dismissal. But Clara didn't falter. She had spent years carrying children through worse storms. She had been forged for this. Victor barked orders into his phone, but his hands shook as he tried to support his daughter. He didn't see Clara yet, didn't recognize the calm determination in her eyes. But he would, soon, because when the world tilted into crisis, the only steady ground left was the one Clara Morales stood on. Victor Carter's voice cracked through the corridor, sharp with authority, yet strained with something raw. "Where's the damn doctor? Get her downstairs. Now!" Assistants fumbled with phones, their panic more about pleasing him than helping Evelyn. The little girl's head lolled against the wall, her breath shallow, her lips paling. The marble floors and gold-framed artwork mocked the helplessness that money couldn't mask. Clara Morales stood at the edge of the scene, her mop cart behind her, like a shadow she was ready to shed. Every instinct screamed at her to move forward. Years of pediatric training stirred with unstoppable precision, pushing aside fear. She didn't see a billionaire or an army of aides. She saw a child in need. Her body remembered what her resume no longer declared. Victor barked again. "She's not breathing right! Somebody do something!" His hands shook as he pulled Evelyn closer, his voice breaking between anger and terror. The aides exchanged frantic looks, frozen by inexperience. Clara took one steady step forward. "Let me help," she said, voice clear, calm, and unyielding. Victor's head snapped toward her, recognition flashing into fury. "You? You're a janitor! Stand back!" His words lashed like a whip, but Clara didn't flinch. She had faced worse than a father's rage. She had faced alarms shrieking in intensive care, machines blaring codes, lives balanced on seconds. She stepped closer, kneeling beside Evelyn, her hands already moving with practiced skill. "She's in distress. You'll lose time waiting for anyone else," Clara said, pressing 2 fingers gently against the child's neck, measuring the faint, erratic rhythm. She tilted Evelyn's chin back with expert care, her eyes narrowing as she monitored the rise and fall of her chest. Victor lunged, grabbing her shoulder, but stopped when he saw Evelyn's body twitch. Panic rooted him. He staggered back, phone dropping to the floor. Clara's steady presence filled the gap his fortune couldn't bridge. "Quiet," Clara commanded, surprising even herself. "If you want her safe, you let me work." The corridor hushed. The aides froze, eyes darting between the billionaire and the janitor, kneeling in authority no money could purchase. Clara pressed her ear near Evelyn's mouth, then placed her hand on the small ribcage, counting the faltering breaths. She remembered the training drills, the cases that had ended in victory and in heartbreak. This wasn't mopping floors. This was life itself. She adjusted Evelyn's posture, coaxing her airway open. Her voice softened, words meant for the child more than the audience. "Stay with me, sweetheart. Just breathe." Victor stood helpless, fists clenched, eyes wide with disbelief. He wanted to order her away, but fear locked his tongue. The power that had defined him all his life was useless in this moment. His daughter's life depended on the woman he had humiliated less than an hour ago. Clara felt the faint shift in Evelyn's breathing, still shallow, but steadier with her intervention. She kept her hands poised, monitoring, adjusting, commanding the rhythm like a conductor in crisis. "Call paramedics now," she said firmly. "Tell them pediatric respiratory distress. They need to know before they arrive." One aide scrambled to obey, repeating her words into the phone with trembling urgency. Victor's jaw tightened, but his eyes clung to Clara's every move, desperate. For Clara, the world narrowed to the fragile life in front of her. Sweat beaded on her brow, but her hands didn't tremble. She blocked out the luxury walls, the billionaire's panic, the looming risk of losing her job. Only Evelyn mattered, and in that moment, Clara wasn't a janitor. She was the nurse she had always been. Minutes stretched like hours. The girl's breathing steadied in fragile increments, each one earned by Clara's intervention. She knew it wasn't enough. Paramedics would have to take over soon. But she had bought Evelyn time. And in emergency medicine, time was life. When the distant wail of sirens filtered in through the glass, relief swept through the crowd. Clara didn't look up. She kept her hand against Evelyn's chest, her ear tuned to every breath. The girl stirred faintly, eyes fluttering open for a moment. Clara smiled softly. "That's it. You're strong. Keep going." Victor stumbled forward, his voice breaking. "Is she?" "She's alive," Clara cut in, her tone steady but edged with steel. Because someone acted instead of shouting. The words hit him like a strike, his face paling further than his daughter's. He opened his mouth, then closed it, silence replacing arrogance. Around them, aides watched with wide eyes, the reversal dawning. They had seen power falter and humility rise. Paramedics burst through the doors, rushing toward Evelyn with equipment. Clara guided them with clipped precision, rattling off symptoms and timeline, her words sharp and professional. They didn't question her authority. They recognized it instantly. Victor stood back, useless, watching his daughter placed onto a stretcher under the command of the janitor he had scorned. As they wheeled Evelyn toward the elevator, Clara finally stood, her knees aching from the cold marble. She wiped her palms against her uniform, heart still racing, but her expression calm. Her gaze flicked briefly to Victor, who looked at her as if seeing her for the first time. For the first time, the billionaire said nothing. The sirens faded into the distance, leaving the corridor hollow in their wake. For a moment, the building itself seemed to hold its breath, the marble and glass straining under silence. Clara Morales stood with her mop cart forgotten behind her, the smell of antiseptic clinging to her hands, though she hadn't touched her cleaning supplies in an hour. Her heart beat steady now, but her mind spun with the reality of what she had just done. She had crossed the invisible line, the one that said janitors stayed invisible, that they never knelt in authority before billionaires. Victor Carter hadn't moved. He stood at the far end of the hall, arms stiff at his sides, his phone dangling useless in one hand. His eyes tracked Clara as though trying to reconcile what he had seen. He had barked orders, yet it was she who had steadied his daughter's breathing. The silence between them was louder than the shouting had been. Finally, one of the aides broke the quiet. "She knew what to do," the young man whispered, awe woven into the words. "She knew before any of us." Clara adjusted her sleeves, ignoring the murmurs. Recognition was dangerous. Recognition meant questions, and questions meant exposure. Her past had been carefully locked away for years, sealed under debt, grief, and a stack of custody filings that demanded she remain humble, obedient, and unseen. Yet tonight had cracked that shell. Sloane Whitaker's heels announced her arrival before her voice did. She rounded the corner, clipboard in hand, irritation radiating like static. "What happened here?" I heard commotion. Her eyes landed on Clara, narrowing instantly. "You again." Victor's gaze snapped to Sloane, his face unreadable. For once, Clara wasn't the target of his anger. He pocketed his phone slowly, his voice lower than before, but carrying weight. "The janitor just saved my daughter's life." The words hung in the air, shocking everyone. Sloane blinked, her mouth tightening. "That's absurd. She acted when no one else did." Victor cut in, sharper now. "If she hadn't, Evelyn wouldn't be breathing." His jaw clenched, the admission costing him, but undeniable. Clara kept her posture steady, though inside, unease churned. This was exposure. This was the spotlight she had avoided. She turned back to her cart, pretending to adjust supplies, hoping the conversation would move on. But Sloane's suspicion sharpened like a blade. "Funny," Sloane said coldly, "how a janitor suddenly knows medical procedures." "You care to explain that, Morales?" Clara's chest tightened. She could feel the eyes on her, hungry for answers. She thought of Lila, asleep at home, her future fragile as glass. Telling the truth here could open doors or shatter everything. Her silence stretched, every second an act of defiance. Victor studied her, his expression conflicted. Billionaire arrogance battled paternal gratitude across his features. At last, he spoke, softer this time. I don't care what her past is. She saved Evelyn. That's all that matters tonight. The aides shifted, whispering among themselves. Clara gripped the mop handle, grounding herself. She wouldn't confirm or deny. She would wait. Timing mattered. She had learned that in hospital wards, where seconds decided everything, Sloane's eyes narrowed further. We'll discuss this in my office tomorrow, she said sharply, her tone final. With a flick of her wrist, she turned and strode away, heels striking like gavel blows. Clara exhaled slowly once the woman disappeared. She should have felt relief, but all she felt was the looming storm. Tomorrow meant confrontation, and confrontation meant risk. Still, her hands were steady. She had been forged in crises, and this was no different. Victor lingered, staring at her with a mix of unease and reluctant respect. You said, pediatric distress, he murmured, almost to himself. That wasn't a guess. Clara didn't respond. She gathered her cart and began to push it toward the elevator. The squeak of the wheels, the only answer she offered. Victor watched her go, his silence more telling than the words. As she descended in the service elevator, the hum of machinery vibrated through her bones. She leaned against the wall, closing her eyes. Images flickered. Evelyn's pale lips, the rhythm of her fragile breaths, the sound of sirens. And beneath it all, Lila's face. Bright and trusting, Clara whispered into the empty space. I can't lose this job. Not now. The doors slid open into the basement level, where concrete walls replaced marble. Here, the building felt honest, bare, unpolished. Clara wheeled her cart into the janitor's room, the familiar scent of bleach greeting her like an old ally. She sank onto the wooden bench, her muscles trembling as the adrenaline finally ebbed. Her phone buzzed, a message from her neighbor, who often checked on Lila at night. She had a bad dream, but settled back down. Sleeping now. Relief washed over Clara, heavier than exhaustion. Lila was safe, unaware of the storm her mother had walked through tonight. Clara set the phone down, rubbing her temples. She knew what tomorrow would bring. Sloane's interrogation, whispers among staff, Victor Carter's scrutiny. But she also knew something else. Tonight had changed the balance. She wasn't invisible anymore. Whether she wanted it or not, her hidden life had leaked into view. And though the exposure terrified her, another truth flickered beneath the fear. When crisis struck, she had been exactly who she always was. Not a janitor, not a shadow, a nurse, a mother, a protector, and the world had seen it. For the first time in years, Clara felt the stirrings of power inside of her. Not the kind billionaires wielded, but the kind that saved lives when money failed. It was dangerous. It was liberating. It was hers. The hum of the janitor's room lights buzzed overhead as Clara Morales sat on the wooden bench, elbows resting on her knees. The sting of bleach clung to the air, grounding her in a space that was hers, though never hers entirely. She stared at the mop leaning in the corner, its handle crooked like a soldier standing guard. It felt almost symbolic now, this humble tool she carried like armor. The world outside had seen her hands steady a child's breathing. No uniform could erase that. Her phone vibrated again. Clara snatched it up quickly, expecting another message from her neighbor. Instead, it was a news alert. Billionaire Victor Carter's daughter rushed to hospital. She froze, pulse kicking hard. The article was bare bones, but the headline alone told her everything. The story was already out. What the cameras hadn't caught, whispers inside the building would carry. And with those whispers, questions about her. Clara locked her phone, pressing it face down against the bench. She couldn't afford attention. Sloane would seize on any excuse to push her out, and now Clara was a liability. A janitor who didn't stay in her lane. A woman with a secret she could no longer keep buried. The service elevator clanged open in the distance. Heavy footsteps approached, echoing against the concrete. Clara braced herself. When the door creaked open, it wasn't Sloane. It was the security guard, the same one who'd sneered at her earlier. His flashlight beam cut through the room before settling on her. "You really stirred something upstairs," he said, leaning against the frame. His smirk was weaker now, shaded with uncertainty. "People are saying Carter's girl would have collapsed if you hadn't stepped in." Clara kept her expression even, though her stomach tightened. "Rumors spread fast." "Not just rumors." He scratched his chin. "I've been here 10 years, Morales. I've seen janitors come and go, but none of them talk like you did. None of them act like you did tonight." His gaze narrowed. "Who were you before this?" The question sliced deep. Clara clenched her jaw, unwilling to answer. She picked up her mop, gripping it as though the motion of work could erase the conversation. "I'm a janitor. That's all you need to know." The guard hesitated, then shrugged. "Maybe, but Carter doesn't look at janitors the way he looked at you." With that, he turned and left, his footsteps fading back into the elevator shaft. Clara leaned against the mop handle, her breath uneven. Secrets didn't stay buried forever. The cracks had widened tonight, and soon the flood would come. By the time she returned to the lobby, dawn was streaking pale light across the city skyline. The glass walls shimmered with early sun, mocking her exhaustion. She finished her rounds in silence, every squeak of the mop a drumbeat counting down to confrontation. When the shift ended, she gathered her cart and headed for the basement. Her body ached, but her mind ran ahead to Lila. She pictured her daughter's smile, the way her curls framed her small face. That was why Clara endured the humiliation, why she had kept her past locked tight. Custody battles weren't won with truth, they were won with stability. And stability meant keeping this job, no matter what Sloane threw at her. Hours later, after dropping Lila at school with a kiss and a promise of pancakes on Saturday, Clara returned for the day's mandatory meeting. Sloane had summoned her, and ignoring it wasn't an option. She walked into the operations office, the smell of expensive leather and coffee greeting her. Sloane sat behind her desk, posture perfect, eyes sharp as glass. Victor Carter stood near the window, his suit immaculate, his expression unreadable. Clara's chest tightened. This wasn't just a disciplinary talk. This was theater. "Sit," Sloane ordered. Clara obeyed, keeping her back straight. Her palms itched, but she folded them neatly in her lap. Sloane wasted no time. "Mr. Carter has informed me of your involvement last night. While commendable in outcome, it was entirely inappropriate for someone in your position. We cannot have staff overstepping boundaries. Liability, exposure, headlines, it all reflects on the building." Clara's pulse thudded, but she kept her voice calm. A child couldn't breathe. Boundaries don't matter when life is at stake. Victor shifted at the window, glancing toward Clara for the first time. His gaze carried something different now. Not arrogance, but calculation. "She's right," he said quietly. "My daughter would be dead if she hadn't acted." Sloane's jaw tightened, but she forced a cold smile. "Regardless, Morales must understand her place. This is a corporate environment, not a hospital." The word hospital stung, though Clara didn't let it show. Her secret had slipped again, spoken by someone who had no idea of its weight. She met Sloane's gaze evenly. "I did what had to be done. Nothing more." Victor's eyes narrowed slightly, as though piecing together fragments. His voice carried a subtle shift, less cutting, more curious. You weren't guessing. You knew exactly what to do. Clara said nothing. Silence was her shield. She wouldn't hand them her past. She wouldn't hand them the weapon that could strip Lila from her arms. The tension in the room stretched like wire. Finally, Sloane leaned back, dismissive. We'll revisit this. For now, return to your duties. And understand, this kind of incident will not happen again. Clara rose, nodding once, and walked out with steady steps. Her heart pounded, but her face betrayed nothing. She had survived the meeting, but she knew this was only the beginning. Victor Carter's curiosity was dangerous. Sloane Whitaker's suspicion was sharper than knives. And somewhere in a hospital bed, Evelyn Carter fought for breath, tethering all their worlds together in a way none of them could yet see. Clara pressed her hand against the elevator's cold steel, whispering under her breath, timing. Just timing. She would wait. She would watch. And when the next moment came, she would be ready to strike. Not with arrogance, but with the quiet, unstoppable authority only she carried. The elevator doors closed, sealing Clara Morales in a box of steel and silence. Her reflection stared back at her, plain uniform, tired eyes, in a steadiness that defied the weight pressing against her chest. She gripped the mop handle, not because she needed balance, but because the familiar texture reminded her who she was fighting for. Lila's face lingered in her mind, reminding her that every step she took inside this tower was for her daughter's safety and future. When the doors opened, Clara stepped into the service corridor. The building's hum was different today. Quieter, more watchful. Whispers had spread overnight. She could feel them in the way coworkers glanced quickly away, in the way aides slowed their pace when she passed. Her anonymity was dissolving, and with it, her shield. She wheeled her cart down the hallway, mind focused on preparation. Sloane Whitaker wasn't finished. Clara could read the woman's intent as clearly as hospital charts. There would be paperwork, accusations, maybe even staged evidence. And Victor Carter's curiosity was just as dangerous. He wasn't the type to let unanswered questions linger, especially not when his daughter's life had been held in the hands of a janitor. Clara needed to be ready for both. By midday, she slipped into the staff cafeteria, a plain space tucked far from executive eyes. The smell of reheated food clung to the air, and the low hum of conversation filled the corners. She collected a coffee, sitting at a back table where she could watch without being watched. As she sipped, fragments of conversation drifted her way. She saved her, I swear. Carter himself said it. Doesn't make sense. She's just a janitor. No, she used medical terms, real ones. I heard her. Clara lowered her eyes, pulse tightening. The whispers were growing. Soon, they would reach Lila's school, the neighborhood, maybe even the courts. Exposure was risk, and risk meant losing everything. Her phone buzzed again. Another headline. Carter heiress stable after overnight scare. Clara's relief was brief, overshadowed by the subheading. Witnesses report building staff intervened before paramedics arrived. Her throat dried. She knew what was coming. Reporters thrived on mystery, and she was about to become their puzzle piece. She slipped her phone away, just as a shadow fell across the table. Clara looked up to see the security guard again. His smirk was gone this time, replaced with something heavier. He pulled out the chair opposite her without asking. "You've got a storm coming," he said flatly. Sloane's furious. She doesn't like being upstaged. And Carter, he's asking questions. Clara sipped her coffee, steadying her voice. Storms don't scare me. Maybe not, but they can drown you if you're not ready. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. I don't know what you used to be, Morales, But you're not like the others. You need allies if you want to keep your job. She studied him carefully. His tone carried no malice now, only a strange kind of warning. A conflicted ally, perhaps, though she wasn't ready to trust him. Still, his words carried weight. Preparation wasn't just about endurance. It was about leverage. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. He shrugged. "Maybe because I've been invisible, too. People only see the uniform, not the person. Watching you last night, it reminded me that sometimes the invisible hold more power than anyone thinks." Clara let the silence stretch, then nodded once. "Then you understand why I can't afford to stumble." He pushed back his chair. "Just be careful. Sloane's already planning something. And Carter? Well, billionaires don't like mysteries." When he left, Clara sat still, her coffee cooling between her hands. Preparation meant more than silence now. It meant readiness to defend herself, to shield her daughter, to face Sloane's schemes head on. She would need to gather her strength, sharpen her focus, and remember every skill she once wielded as a nurse. By late afternoon, Clara returned to her duties, polishing the lobby until it gleamed. The grand chandelier above sparkled, but her thoughts were sharper still. She replayed every word from Sloane, every glance from Carter, weaving them into a map of what was coming. Her preparation was deliberate. She rehearsed explanations that revealed nothing, replayed medical drills in her mind, and steadied her breathing with each stroke of the mop. She reminded herself that the building itself was her witness. Security cameras, staff, even Carter's aides had seen the truth. If Sloane tried to bury her, Clara would not go quietly. As evening fell, the building buzzed with unusual activity. Reporters loitered outside, cameras flashing at every black car that arrived. Clara caught sight of them through the glass doors, their voices muffled but insistent. She knew what they wanted. The story behind the nameless janitor who had stepped into the spotlight. She tightened her grip on the mop handle. Timing. Always timing. She would not reveal herself yet, but she would be ready when the moment demanded it. Ready to stand not as a janitor, not as a secret, but as the woman who carried truth in her hands. And when that moment came, no billionaire, no director, no storm would strip her of her dignity again. The lobby glass rattled faintly as reporters pressed forward, cameras flashing against the evening light. Clara Morales kept her mop strokes steady, each motion deliberate, as if polishing marble could drown out the storm gathering beyond the doors. She had worked through plenty of storms before. Court hearings, debt notices, grief too heavy to name. This one was different. This storm was circling her directly. Sloane Whitaker appeared near the reception desk. Her voice clipped as she barked orders to staff. "Keep them out!" No comment. "Anyone caught speaking will be terminated." Her sharp heels struck the tile like hammers, her eyes scanning the lobby until they found Clara. That look alone carried accusation, as though Clara had invited the media herself. Clara bent over the mop, calm on the outside, though her chest tightened. She had learned to survive under scrutiny. Silence was her shield, preparation, her weapon. She replayed her plan. Say little, reveal nothing, let timing do the work. Still, the tension prickled her skin like static. The security guard from the night before approached, his steps hesitant. He kept his voice low as he passed by. "They're asking for you," reporters heard whispers. Carter didn't deny it. His eyes flicked toward Sloane, then back to Clara. "She's furious." Clara didn't pause. "Then I'll keep doing my job. Just be ready," he muttered before moving on. The elevator chimed. Heads turned as Victor Carter stepped into the lobby. He carried the presence of a man used to commanding space, But tonight, there was a strain in his posture, a weariness in his face. He scanned the lobby quickly, and when his eyes landed on Clara, he didn't look away. He walked toward her, ignoring Sloane's attempt to intercept. Clara straightened slowly, mop in hand, the bucket at her side. She felt every eye on them, staff holding their breath, Sloane's glare burning like ice. "Morales," Victor said, voice quieter than the night before. "The hospital says Evelyn is stable. She asked about you." The words rippled through the lobby, subtle but undeniable. Clara's fingers tightened on the mop handle. Gratitude in his tone was new, but dangerous. "I'm glad she's improving," she replied evenly. Sloane cut in sharply. "Mr. Carter, this is inappropriate. She's staff. We need to maintain boundaries." Victor raised a hand, silencing her. "Last night, when my daughter couldn't breathe, none of your staff helped." "She did," his gaze fixed on Clara. "That's not something I forget." Whispers stirred around them. Clara's heart thudded, but her face remained calm. She had prepared for this. His curiosity, his recognition. What she hadn't prepared for was the way Evelyn's name softened his voice. Sloane's fury sharpened. "Morales overstepped protocol. Liability is at stake. If this becomes public, it already is," Victor said flatly. His eyes flicked toward the reporters outside. "And the public cares more about who saved a child than about protocol." Clara held her ground, saying nothing. She would not step into their battle yet. Timing. Always timing. Victor exhaled, his voice dropping lower, directed at her alone. "I don't know who you really are, but you're not just a janitor. You didn't hesitate. You didn't guess. You knew the words pressed hard against the wall of silence Clara had built. She met his gaze, steady but guarded. "I did what needed to be done. Nothing more." His eyes searched hers for a crack, a confession, but Clara gave him nothing. The weight of her hidden past was hers to carry, not his to uncover. Sloane stepped closer, her voice slicing. "Enough of this. Morales, return to your duties. Mr. Carter, we'll debrief separately." Victor hesitated, but finally turned away, heading for the doors where reporters surged forward. Flashbulbs lit his exit, and the lobby exhaled. Clara lowered her eyes, resuming her mop strokes as though nothing had shifted. But everything had. When the crowd thinned, she wheeled her cart into the east corridor. The security guard caught up with her, speaking in a hushed tone. "You handled that well, but she's not done. Sloane's already drafting paperwork to push you out." Clara's grip tightened on the cart. She had expected this. Survival meant anticipating every move, preparing counter counter. "Let her," Clara said quietly. "I'm ready." The guard studied her, then nodded slowly. "You're not afraid of her, are you?" Clara paused, then shook her head. "Fear doesn't help anyone." "Breathe." The guard didn't understand the full weight of her words, but he respected them. He stepped back, letting her continue alone. As Clara finished her rounds, her thoughts sharpened into resolve. Victor's gratitude had exposed her. Sloane's fury had cornered her, and the whispers among staff had begun to reshape her place in this building. But Clara had faced worse storms in hospital wards, where seconds separated life from death. This was only another crisis, and crises were her element. She polished the last pane of glass, her reflection staring back at her with quiet authority. For years, she had buried who she was. But the truth had begun to surface, and no force, not Sloane, not Carter, not the threat of exposure, could stop it now. When the mop bucket squeaked back into the janitor's closet, Clara whispered to herself, steady and calm. "This isn't the end. It's the beginning." The janitor's closet door clicked shut, leaving Clara Morales in darkness, broken only by the faint hum of the building's pipes. She leaned against the cool cinder-block wall, forcing her breath steady. Her whisper still echoed in her ears. This isn't the end. It's the beginning. She had spent years staying small, invisible, safe. But safety had shattered the moment Victor Carter's daughter gasped for air. Clara straightened, brushing dust from her uniform. The storm wasn't just circling now. It was here. She knew Sloane Whitaker wouldn't wait long before striking. And when she did, she'd use every ounce of corporate authority to bury Clara. That meant Clara had to be ready to face her, not in whispers, not in silence, but in the open. By late evening, the lobby buzzed again. Reporters still hovered outside, their voices rising and falling like a tide against the glass. Inside, executives gathered for a donor event, hastily repurposed to reassure investors that nothing was amiss. The grand chandelier blazed above polished marble, the smell of expensive wine masking the undercurrent of unease. Clara wheeled her cart through the edges of the crowd, unseen but present, her senses alert. Sloane stood near the reception dais, her black suit immaculate, her voice commanding as she reassured a cluster of guests. Everything is under control. The situation was exaggerated by the press. Her eyes flicked toward Clara briefly, a glint of threat sharp as glass. Clara held her gaze only a second, then continued pushing the cart, her expression unreadable. Victor Carter arrived minutes later, his presence commanding immediate attention. Conversations hushed as he strode across the lobby, aides trailing like shadows. He shook hands perfunctorily, but his eyes were colder than usual, distant with exhaustion. Clara caught the faint slump in his shoulders, the same look she had seen in countless parents who had sat by hospital beds long into the night. He was a man cracked by fear, even if he'd never admit it aloud. The event swelled, with chatter again, investors sipping wine while whispers spread about Evelyn's condition. Clara worked methodically at the lobby's edge, her mop gliding across tile already spotless. Yet her ears caught every word, every tone. She didn't have to insert herself into the spotlight. The spotlight was moving toward her on its own. And then it happened. One of the reporters outside slipped past distracted security, striding boldly into the lobby with a microphone raised. "Mr. Carter, is it true your daughter was saved by a janitor?" The words sliced through the air like a blade. Heads turned, cameras flashed from the glass beyond. Victor froze, his expression hardening. Sloane stepped forward immediately, intercepting. "That is misinformation," she snapped. No staff were involved. The matter was handled by professionals. Clara's chest tightened, but she stayed rooted. She had expected this. Sloane's strategy was clear. Erase her. Erase the truth. But Victor didn't confirm Sloane's words. He hesitated, his eyes flicking toward Clara at the edge of the lobby. That hesitation was all it took. Guests followed his gaze. Conversations hushed. Suddenly, the janitor in the corner wasn't invisible anymore. The reporter caught the shift instantly. "Is that her?" he pressed, pointing his microphone toward Clara. "Is that the woman who intervened?" Clara gripped the mop handle, every instinct screaming to retreat. But preparation had taught her this moment would come. Timing mattered, and the timing was now. She stepped forward slowly, her uniform plain, her voice calm. "I was there," Clara said, her words carrying across the lobby. The child couldn't breathe. "I did what needed to be done." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The reporter surged closer, firing questions. But Clara didn't waver. Her eyes stayed on Victor, steady and unshaken. Sloane's fury erupted. "This is unacceptable! Morales, you are dismissed immediately. Remove yourself from this building." The outburst echoed too loudly, too sharp, drawing every eye. Investors frowned. Whispers rose. Cameras flashed. In her desperation to bury Clara, Sloane had overplayed her hand. Clara saw instantly. This wasn't erasure. It was exposure. Victor's voice cut through the noise, low but undeniable. "No one dismisses her." He stepped closer, his presence commanding the room. "She saved my daughter's life. That is not up for debate." The lobby fell silent. Sloane's face paled, her authority undercut in front of donors and press. Clara stood tall, mop still in hand, dignity shining through the uniform. She hadn't needed to shout, hadn't needed to reveal her past. All she had needed was patience, preparation, and the truth unfolding in its own time. Reporters clamored for more, but Clara turned away, her silence deliberate. She had said enough. She returned to her cart, gripping the handle with calm steadiness, leaving the weight of her words to linger in the air. For the first time in years, she didn't feel invisible. She felt seen. And though danger still loomed, Sloane's schemes, Victor's curiosity, Clara knew this. The crisis had cracked open the walls around her. The reversal had begun. Clara Morales pushed her cart back toward the far corner of the lobby, the mop bucket squeaking softly against the marble. Reporters jostled near the doors, flashes stuttering like lightning, their voices clamoring for more. But she kept her pace calm, steady, her silence saying more than words could. She had spoken once, and it had been enough to tilt the balance. Now she let the echo of Victor Carter's defense of her carry. Sloane Whitaker's heels struck the floor like gunfire as she stormed across the lobby. Her face was composed, but her eyes burned, icy shards that could cut through steel. "This spectacle ends now," she hissed, her voice pitched to Carrie. "We are a professional institution. We do not air chaos in public." The crowd of investors and executives murmured uneasily, their glances sliding toward Clara. Her presence, once invisible, now commanded their attention. Clara stood still, one hand resting on the mop handle like a quiet anchor. She didn't need to fight Sloane. The scene itself was exposing the truth. The reporter who had slipped inside shouted above the noise, "Mr. Carter, will you confirm she saved your daughter's life? The public deserves to know." Victor straightened, his jaw tight. He looked at Clara for a long moment, then turned to the crowd. "Yes," he said, voice carrying across the marble hall. "She did." The murmur swelled into a roar of whispers, reporters hammering questions against the glass as staff exchanged shocked glances. Sloane's composure cracked. "Mr. Carter, with respect, you cannot—" He cut her off, his tone sharper than steel. "Respect? My daughter is alive because she acted when no one else could. That's respect." The words silenced the room. For the first time, Clara saw Sloane falter, her certainty unraveling. Clara's chest tightened, not with fear, but with quiet triumph. She hadn't revealed her past, hadn't defended herself. The truth had spoken for her. But the confrontation wasn't over. Sloane turned on Clara, her voice loud, calculated for the audience. "You put this building at risk. Liability, exposure, insubordination. You've endangered everything we've built here. A mop doesn't make you a medic. You broke protocol." Every eye swung back to Clara. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to stand taller, shoulders square. Her voice was steady, calm, but firm enough to cut through the noise. "Protocols don't keep children breathing. Training does. Instinct does. And last night, both mattered more than policies on paper." The words struck the crowd with the weight of lived truth. Executives shifted uncomfortably, some nodding, others averting their eyes. Clara could see it, the divide opening. some siding with hierarchy, others recognizing what they had witnessed. Sloane's lips curled. You admit it then. You overstepped. You acted beyond your role. Clara gripped the mop handle, not as a weapon, but as a symbol. I acted as a human being. A child was in danger. If that's overstepping, then so be it. The lobby erupted, some applauding softly, others gasping. Reporters outside banged against the glass for entry, their cameras flashing furiously. Clara remained calm, her heartbeat steady. She had been here before, in hospital corridors, where parents begged for miracles. This was only another kind of crisis, and she knew how to hold ground when others faltered. Victor stepped forward again, his voice lower but filled with authority. She's right. We can build 100 towers, raise 1,000 rules, but none of it matters if we can't keep a child alive inside these walls. If protocol silences courage, then maybe it's the protocol that's broken. The applause grew louder this time, no longer cautious. Executives who rarely raised their voices in dissent clapped, their approval feeding momentum. Sloane's face tightened, her authority crumbling in front of witnesses. Clara lowered her eyes briefly, not to retreat, but to remind herself of why she stood here. She thought of Lila, her small hands curled around a blanket, dreaming peacefully. She thought of Evelyn, breathing steadily now because someone had refused to bow to fear. Family was her stake, dignity her anchor. This wasn't about recognition. It was about survival, about showing her daughter that silence wasn't the only option. Sloane tried one final strike. This is a farce. She's manipulating sympathy. She's nothing but enough. Victor's voice boomed, final and commanding. The word hung in the air, silencing everything but the click of cameras. He turned to the crowd. You've seen with your own eyes who she is. Judge her by her actions, not her uniform. The applause surged, filling the lobby with a resonance Clara hadn't heard in years. It wasn't for her as a janitor. It wasn't for her as a hidden nurse. It was for her as someone who refused to let a child die when everyone else froze. Sloane's shoulders stiffened, her power fractured in the public eye. She turned abruptly, retreating toward the executive wing, her heels clicking like retreating gunfire. The crowd's energy shifted fully toward Clara, their murmurs carrying her name like an unspoken vindication. Clara exhaled, her grip on the mop loosening slightly. She didn't smile, didn't bask. She simply stood there, calm, steady, unshaken. This was what victory looked like. Not arrogance, not revenge, but dignity restored in front of witnesses. And for the first time, Clara let herself believe that maybe the storm had chosen the wrong person to try to erase. The lobby slowly emptied, but the echoes of applause lingered in the marble like a promise no one could erase. Clara Morales stood with her mop at her side, the bucket resting quietly, as if even it understood the night's weight. For once, no one looked through her. No one dismissed her presence. Eyes had seen, ears had heard, and dignity, long buried under bleach and uniforms, was restored in the place where she had been humiliated. She exhaled, steadying herself. Victory never came with fireworks. It came in stillness, in the calm that followed a storm. She gathered her cart and pushed it toward the janitor's closet, the squeak of the wheels less heavy now. Each sound echoed as if announcing her retreat. But this time, it wasn't into invisibility. It was into ownership. She had stood her ground in front of witnesses. She had proven that no protocol, no authority, no billionaire could define her worth. Victor Carter remained at the far end of the lobby, speaking quietly with aides. His eyes flicked to her once, softer now, filled with something that looked almost like gratitude. He didn't approach, and she didn't expect him to. Words weren't needed. The truth had already been spoken between them in the chaos of a child's faltering breath. Clara wheeled her cart into the service corridor. The walls here were bare concrete, humming with the building's veins. She leaned briefly against the handle, closing her eyes. In her mind, she saw Lila's smile waiting at home, a reminder of why she fought so fiercely. Her daughter would never know the full storm of tonight, but she would know this. Her mother had refused to be erased. The elevator doors opened, revealing the security guard. He hesitated, then nodded to her, his voice lower than usual. "You stood taller than anyone tonight." Clara allowed herself the faintest smile. "I just did what needed to be done." He studied her for a moment longer, then stepped back, letting her pass. Clara entered the elevator, pressing the button for the basement. As the doors closed, she caught her reflection again, uniform plain, hair pulled back, eyes steady. Not a symbol, not a hero, but herself. And for the first time in years, that was enough. The ride down was quiet. She thought of Evelyn, safe in her hospital bed. She thought of Victor, humbled in front of cameras. She thought of Sloane, retreating with her authority fractured. And she thought of herself, the nurse she had been, the janitor she was, the mother she remained. Every role, every mask, every sacrifice had brought her to this point. When the doors opened, she stepped into the basement corridor. The smell of bleach greeted her like an old companion. She parked the cart, hung her mop, and sat on the wooden bench. Her phone buzzed, a message from her neighbor. "Lila's asking when you'll be home. She wants pancakes tomorrow." Clara's throat tightened. She typed back quickly, "Tomorrow morning. Tell her I promised." She set the phone down, her hands folding loosely in her lap. For a long moment, she let herself feel everything. The exhaustion, the weight, the release. The night had dragged her through humiliation, through confrontation, through exposure, and yet she had emerged steady. Not victorious in wealth or power, but victorious in something deeper: dignity, truth, survival. Above her, the building pulsed with life, reporters still buzzing, executives still whispering. But down here, in the quiet hum of pipes and concrete, Clara Morales allowed herself a final whisper. "You chose the wrong person to break." She rose, collected her bag, and walked toward the exit. Outside, the city lights glowed, indifferent and eternal. But for Clara, everything had shifted. She wasn't invisible anymore. She had been seen, and the truth of her worth had broken through marble walls and glass ceilings alike. Tomorrow, Sloane would try again. Tomorrow, whispers would circle. Tomorrow, Victor might demand answers. But tonight, Clara carried her own victory home to her daughter. That was enough. And now, it's your turn. Tell me, what should our next story be? Which injustice do you want to see broken open in the light? Subscribe and don't miss our next story. Trust me, you'll feel it. And tell me in the comments, what injustice should we tackle next?